Joining us now to weigh in on this is Professor Sampson Mamphweli, who's the head of the Department of Science and Innovation's Energy Secretariat. Prof, thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon. So finally, the Electricity Minister has been allocated these powers. The President says, well, the powers related to the implementation of the determination made in terms of Section 34 will remain with the Minister of Energy. What does that mean?
Good evening to you and the viewers, or late afternoon. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a gray area there, but just for me to put this into context, so that people understand what the President is trying to do. The President has announced what he called the Energy Action Plan, and he has put together the NECOM Energy Crisis Committee with the various work streams. So that is where the work is being done to determine the additional generation capacity that is required to end load shedding. So it makes absolute sense for the President, because it's now giving the Minister of Electricity the responsibility to create what he calls the one-stop shop, or the central area where the work that NECOM is doing will be coordinated. So it makes absolute sense for him to give some of the powers to the Minister of Electricity, which has got to do with the determination of the new generation capacity and the various sources from which this generation capacity will come from. And he has done it in line with the Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act. Now, where there is a gray area, the determination from NECOM still needs to go through to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, which is basically means that the Minister of Electricity needs to then get that determination, and then instead of implementing it, he needs to pass it over to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy for implementation. And the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy also has a document for which he is a custodian, which is the Integrated Resource Plan, which is the document that he uses for ministerial determination. So there is a gray area there in terms of which is what. Are we going to now go and implement the recommendation of NECOM, separate from the ministerial determination in line with the Integrated Resource Plan, which the Minister is currently reviewing?
Okay, so just to clarify, Prof, so the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy is still the custodian of our Energy Master Plan, the IRP, but the Minister of Electricity will have to determine these energy sources and the new generation capacity needed. But then that's in the IRP.
Yes.
Okay.
That is where the gray area is.
Okay. It's been a long time coming. The question for many South Africans is, what difference is this going to make in our power crisis? So how important is this transfer of powers going to be in the Minister of Electricity executing his responsibilities, which is to significantly reduce the severity and frequency of the power cuts as a matter of agency?
So in my view, the powers, or the executive powers that the Minister of Electricity has been given, is basically to make recommendations to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy. The Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy still has the final say in terms of the procurement of new generation capacity going forward. And whatever it does needs to align with the provisions of the Integrated Resource Plan, which he has been doing. But I understand the fact that there could be some other information that may come from the work that NECOM is doing, the Energy Crisis Committee is doing, for which the Minister of Electricity will be responsible. And based on those such recommendations, something like risk mitigation procurement can be recommended by the Minister of Electricity to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, and then the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy will procure in line with the provisions of the Integrated Resource Plan, because the Integrated Resource Plan looks at the generation capacity in its totality. It also looks at the grid availability and all other aspects. So for me, it's more of a recommendation as opposed to an implementation kind of a thing. So it's basically shared responsibilities within government. And I think that's where Chris got it wrong. The powers were not taken away from the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy. The responsibilities were just shared in terms of the fact that the electricity minister will make recommendations, not necessarily implement anything, in my view.
Yeah, I guess when I was asking about what difference all of this makes is, what is it that the electricity minister is going to be able to do now with some of these powers that Mantashe was unable to do?
So the Minister of Electricity will be able to coordinate work that NECOM is doing. He will be able to interface with ESCOM and the ESCOM board. And for that, for him to interact with the ESCOM board, there's another gray area there that the president needs to clarify to the nation, because the shareholder representative is Minister Kodan. Which basically means that if the Minister of Electricity needs to interact with the ESCOM board, with the executive, exercising executive powers, which is limited to oversight and also looking after the shareholders compact that the shareholder gives to ESCOM. There must be concurrence from the Minister of Public Enterprises, which I think they might have dealt with that in the background. Mm-hmm. The statement is not telling us everything. So the biggest issue here is to create a one-stop shop where the work that the Energy Crisis Committee is doing gets coordinated by this one ministry, and then the recommendations then are taken to the various implementing the departments and agencies.
How binding are those recommendations going to be?
The recommendations are not binding, will not be binding, in my view. They are mere recommendations, but because the crisis itself requires that government works together, I don't see a situation where the Minister of Electricity makes recommendations, for instance, to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, and the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy refuses to implement such recommendations. I see a situation where they will work together and in harmony and ensure that we deal with the crisis, because we are in a crisis kind of a mode.
Okay. Prof, thank you so much for making time for us.